This podcast is brought to you by India Knowledge at Wharton. Please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu/India for more information.
India Imagine was the theme of the 2008 Wharton India Economic Forum that was held in Philadelphia recently. The day-long event attracted several leaders including APJ Abdul Kalam, former president of India, as well as CEOs of Indian companies, nonprofit groups, consulting, and private equity firms. India Knowledge at Wharton brings you one-on-one conversations with these leaders.
We're going to speak today with Vivek Wadhwa, who's a fellow at the Labor and Work-Life Program at Harvard Law School, and also executive in residence at the Pratt School of Engineering at Duke University. Vivek, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here, Mukul.
Before we talk about your work in academia, I know you have a very interesting background as an entrepreneur. Could you tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial experience?
Sure, absolutely. I grew up to the ranks of IT, basically, programmer, systems analyst, project manager, and eventually I developed some technology at First Boston, which led to the creation of my first startup company called Seer Technologies. We were developing revolutionary technology to generate systems from high-level specifications. Seer was a very successful company, 0 to 120 million in 5 years, IPO, spectacular success. And then after IPOs, you often go on the rocks. So I exited soon afterwards to start my second company, which was re-engineering legacy systems and modernizing them. That was also a spectacular success until the dot-com bubble burst and until I started having health problems and I realized that I had to take a break from the rat race.
Where were these companies based?
The first one was a spin-off from First Boston in New York City, and we moved it to the Raleigh-Durham area. And the second one was in the same area.
Now, is the entrepreneurial experience in the southern part of the country different than it might be, say, in the Northeast or in Silicon Valley?
Mukul, I'll tell you what happened. I mean, despite the fact I had built a $120 million company, taken it public, it's probably one of the most successful software companies of its time. I had access to anyone. I got emails returned from Scott McNealy, Bill Gates, who's who of the tech industry. And then I was starting my second company. If I was in the Silicon Valley, I would have had venture capitalists tripping over each other to come to me. In the Raleigh area, I couldn't get them to return my phone calls. Why? Which I found out later on after networking through the Silicon Valley and through Boston, because my people didn't make good managers. This is how the Silicon Valley used to be 20 years ago for Indians and for immigrants. That changed. The South is still running behind in that sense, that you still have these old images of Indians being low-level technicians and not being successful as managers. And there's a discomfort generally in funding immigrant firms. If you look at if you looked at it'll take North Carolina. Other than my company, I don't know one other company in the last 15 years that's been funded which had an Indian CEO.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Have these experiences helped to shape your research agenda as you have moved into academia? And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I started out by studying globalization generally. We were looking into, what really triggered off my research at Duke was when I joined, that students came to me because I had been a pretty well-known tech entrepreneur. And they were asking me for mentoring and advice. And there was one question they asked me which really stumped me. They asked what courses could they do that would give them, that would make their jobs outsourcing proof. And I should have known the answer to that because I had been involved with outsourcing. I'd been with globalization. The trouble was I didn't know why they were worried and what they could do about it, so I started researching it. And the more I researched, the more I got concerned about U.S. competitiveness. So then I had to shift gears. I wanted to look at what the U.S. could do to keep its edge. And this is where my past came in, that I knew that in the tech industry, that immigrants were playing an increasingly larger role. That in particular, I knew there were a lot of Indians who were starting tech companies. I also wanted to compare the different regions, compare immigrant entrepreneurship across the region. So basically, I got together with Dean Annalise Saxion of UC Berkeley, and we tried to update her 1999 study, which found that a quarter of the tech startups in Silicon Valley were founded by immigrants. In a nutshell, what we found was that the trend which began in Silicon Valley had become a nationwide trend. That 25% of the companies nationwide were founded by immigrants. 52% of those in Silicon Valley were founded by immigrants. And Indians were by far the largest founding group of these immigrants. It confirmed what I knew. It also showed me on a region-by-region basis that the entire RTP area is at the bottom of the list in terms of immigrant entrepreneurship. It proved in numbers what I had known through anecdotal evidence.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did you also find any evidence on about revenues and jobs created by companies launched by immigrant entrepreneurs?
Yeah, we found that in 2005, these immigrant-founded companies in the engineering and tech sector, they generated $52 billion in revenue and employed 450,000 people. Now, to the people who are opposed to skilled immigration, if you added up all the engineers and technologists that entered the U.S. in that 10-year period in which we did this survey, they generated, the number of jobs that these immigrant-founded companies were generating was more than the number of immigrants we allowed in that entire 10-year period. Plus, they were fueling the economy. The fact that you have 25% more startups than you may have otherwise have had is hugely important for the U.S. economic growth and for our global competitive advantage.
Like the issue you mentioned about the entry of skilled immigrants into the U.S., another issue that has been somewhat controversial is the outsourcing of jobs overseas,
right,
and especially skilled jobs going overseas. Have you looked at that in your research,
Yes.
and what's been some of what does your research show in that area?
We looked at R&D going offshore because it's one thing for when manufacturing goes. Let's take dressmaking. Dressmaking goes, you still have dress design, right? Now, if dress design goes, what do you have left? So what's happened right now is that whether we like it or not, a lot of low-level technology jobs have gone overseas. That's fine, as long as we're still doing the design and the analysis in the USA. What we're seeing is that increasingly R&D is shifting overseas to India, China, and all over the world. Now, you can't stop it. No matter what the US does, it cannot stop the fact that India is rising rapidly. China is trying very hard to rise and catch up with India, but our research has shown that they're having lots and lots of problems because you can't mandate innovation. And it's what the Chinese are learning the hard way. So India's rising, China's struggling, but nevertheless they're spending massively on R&D. So what can the US do? I mean, we can't stop it. We're not going to shut our borders, and we're not going to shut down R&D happening overseas. What we have to do is we have to now figure out how to adapt to it and benefit from it, and to uplift our entire workforce.
And how does the US do that?
Well, this is another thing that the conclusion that I've come to from my research, because one of the things we discovered was that India its education system is really weak. That the number of engineers that graduate is much, much less than is commonly believed. And the fact is that they're graduating only 800, 900 PhDs a year in engineering, 30,000, 35,000 real masters a year in engineering. So this contradicts everything I've just said about India rising in R&D. The question is, how can a country in which the education system is so weak, in which it's politicized, and even though they're now talking about making investment, the fact is that it'll take 5 years before that investment has any benefit. How is it that India is rising so rapidly? The answer that I've discovered after meeting with dozens of companies over there is in the workforce training. That Indian companies have taken the best practices from the USA and from Europe and moved those up a couple of notches. That they can train managers in the USA to go from the equivalent of a fresher in India, which means a recent graduate joining a technology company, to manager takes about 10 years or so. In India, they can do that in 3 years or maximum 4 years because they perfected the art of training people. They invest heavily year by year in upgrading their workforce. We've forgotten how to do that. Our best companies used to do this. I mean, some of them still do, but the vast majority of American companies don't invest in their workforce anymore. India has learned how to do that from the USA, and they perfected the art. So if you ask me what's the number one thing the US can do to keep competitive, yes, we keep talking about improving K-12 education, and it's very important. Math and science are important. But the fact is that there are 120 million people in our workforce. Invest in them. Start with upgrading your workforce, and you'll become competitive.
So could you offer some examples of the kind of things that you have seen companies in India or China do to invest in their workforce that could be replicated by companies in the US?
I can tell you from India, because in China we haven't seen the same level of innovation. In China, the innovation has largely been being driven by multinational corporations, and they're simply replicating the US practices in China, nothing more. I haven't seen anything advanced beyond that in China. Now, in India, it was just amazing. You start off with recruiting. The fact is that Microsoft, for example, gets 200,000 or 300,000 resumes a year from programmers. They have software that goes through it, and it's just wrote based on resumes. They'll weed through it and do it, and then they select the people they want to interview. Well, in India, the education system is pretty weak. And if you went simply by degrees and resumes, you won't hire anyone. Yes, the industry has to do it. So, companies like Convergys, companies like Genpact, what they've done is they've set up storefronts that you go to, and it's like going to a shopping mall, and they have video presentations where you can take your family, learn all about the company, and you can do an interview on the spot. If they think you have potential, then they'll put you through a process, hire you, and then they'll train you in the local area as well. Now that's innovative. The fact is that they're not relying on resumes the way we rely on resumes. And then you start work. Well, you go to Infosys and they put you through a 4-month training program, which is like a boot camp. By the time you're done with that, you've got the equivalent of a master's degree. It doesn't stop there. In the USA, once you graduate and join a company, you're expected to now be productive, and that's typically the last training you go through. Companies like IBM offer you online training, and they facilitate your learning if you want to learn. But the fact is, there's no incentive built in the system. Well, in India, you go to companies like Satyam, Infosys, and so on. They mandate that you must receive 100 to 200 hours of training every year of your career. So basically, the Indians receive more training. Indians at the top companies receive more training than Americans receive in vacation, and then they get rewarded for doing it. And then there are systems set up to manage the progression of the career. We have HR directors. Well, they have talent directors, which report into CEOs of the companies as well. They give talent development the same level of importance that we give HR development over here. So they manage your career, they help you through it, they guide you through the entire process. The CEOs and executives spend an inordinate amount of time training their employees and building the workforce and so on. So I can go on and on for half an hour about the amazing things that are doing there, but the U.S. needs to learn from them. This is getting back to how can the U.S. keep its edge. It's time for us to learn from our disciples. We've been the guru so far in management and workforce training. India has been the disciple. It's now time for the guru to learn from the disciple.
That's really interesting. Right. Just to change tacks for a little while, I know along with your work in entrepreneurship as well as in IT and in academia, you had a brief foray into Bollywood. Tell us about that experience.
You want me to confess my sins now, right?
Please.
When I first disengaged from the tech world, I had been working so hard that I didn't get time to spend with my children. My son had decided he wanted to be in India and he wanted to be a movie star, and he was fascinated by Bollywood. I was really worried about him leaving his technical career, his promising technology career, and moving into Bollywood. So I decided to take him into it. I basically got involved with some producers and helped produce a film in Bollywood. And I gave him a role in the film, and basically went through the entire experience of Bollywood. By the time we were done, he says, "Dad, thanks for taking me there, but no thanks. I'm out of here. I want to go back to the tech world." And I also learned how crooked Bollywood is, because we were dealing with American producers and Hollywood people. I tell you, Bollywood, for all of its bad fame, doesn't hold a candle to the crookedness of Hollywood. They're both very corrupt industries.
How so?
Just entire system, Mukul. Everything from the way financing is done to the way it's managed to the way the system is rigged in favor of the large studios. I mean, the entire system is very weak, and both industries are equally corrupt.
Well, we must come back at some future date to a more detailed conversation about that. But for now, can you tell us a little bit about what kind of future research projects you're working on?
Right. One of the things we learned is that industries have changed now. Before, you used I'm sure most people, even now, when they think of the automotive industry, they think of the American automotive industry versus Japanese automotive industry. Now you hear about an Indian automotive industry. Well, the fact is there's no such thing as an American automotive industry. That the technology for American cars is built globally. The technology for Chinese cars is built globally. The parts for the Indian Tata car are assembled globally. What's happened is that entire industries have globalized. Take the pharma industry, the same thing. The fact is that the entire pharma industry has now diffused. That you're now increasingly seeing drug discovery happening in India and China. You're seeing clinical trials happening in India and China. You're seeing almost every segment, every value segment of that industry happening in India and China. The same thing with the aerospace industry, the same thing with the semiconductor industry. Industry by industry, I'm actually analyzing 6 industries to show that they've become like sand now. It's Lego blocks. It's no longer monolithic blocks anymore. It's sand which is dispersing. So we're demonstrating how globalization has changed the entire face of industries. I'm doing an extensive new project on workforce training and education. I'm also doing a follow-up on the immigration research to understand, what has happened to returnees, because what we're finding is that increasingly returnees have been driving innovation in China. And they did in India, but India has become self-sustaining in terms of innovation. It's really built the domestic capability to do what it needs to do. It's not dependent on returnees anymore, but we're doing extensive new research on returnees. And then my favorite topic is entrepreneurship. We're also looking into the backgrounds of American-born entrepreneurs and so on, so on, and so on. So you'll be hearing a lot from me, and we'll be publishing quite a few interesting papers over the next 12 months or so.
I look forward to seeing them. And Vivek, thanks so much for joining us today.
I enjoyed being with you, Mukul.
For more information, please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu/India.